Okay, let's talk about Shakespeare's sonnets. The sonnets are one of the crowning artistic achievements in all of human history, up there with Beethoven's symphonies. The sonnets are music, they're beautiful artifice, they're mirror. They say more about you than they do Shakespeare, the writer. They are open to endless interpretation. Now, before we get into the sonnets, how to read a sonnet, breaking down the structure, and then a deep dive into specific sonnets, we're going to look at quite a few. I'm going to give you a reading assignment, or a challenge, from today onwards. And the challenge is this: read the sonnets in sequence across the span of many weeks or longer. And in doing so, you are going to be hunting out and collecting your favourites. Harold Bloom said that everybody should collect favourite acts from Shakespeare plays. Well, I would add to that and say, in addition to collecting acts, we should be collecting sonnets. And how do we collect sonnets? We, again to use a Bloomian phrase, possess them by memory. How do you possess a sonnet, or indeed any poem, indeed any piece of literature? By memory. Repeated exposure. Bringing your life experience to bear upon the work. So you're going to read the sonnets in sequence. There are 154 sonnets. And then you are going to be on the lookout for the ones that resonate most deeply with you. And when you come to a sonnet, you'll feel the resonance. And if you're reading it correctly, you're going to be reading it with the three different brains. You've got your brain up here, mind, intellect. That's good because there are a lot of different abstract language patterns, different contraptions, verbal ornaments and tricks, and it's an intellectual unravelment reading a sonnet. It's like playing a chess game, solving a puzzle. It's really fun. But you're going to read it with this brain, the brain that exists in the chest, your heart. We'll call it the heart, but the heart is intelligent. And you're going to read it with your gut as well. The gut is going to tell you which sonnets resonate with you the most. Now, why do you want to read it with three brains? Because the sonnets, in offering endless interpretation, will not give you even a fraction of their reward, their gold, on the first reading, nor the second reading. You're going to have to, when you feel the resonance of a certain sonnet, for me, some of my favourites are Sonnet 121, "'Tis better to be vile than vile esteemed." Yeah. I like Sonnet 29, "When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I will alone beweep my outcast state." I have many more, and we're going to get into those. I have a few favourites that are not famous, that are not revered, but they speak to me. And then there are some that are really eminently so embedded in the culture that first reading you might not be able to fully appreciate them. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Let us not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. So what you're going to do is you're going to read them in sequence and take your time. And then when you feel a pull to a certain sonnet, focus in on it. Make a note, circle it. I'm working, by the way, from the Auden sonnets. The reason this volume is so good is because they print one sonnet on one page, just one, and then notes on the other page, breaking down the etymology of words, some of the archaic words, which is useful. And it's interesting, and they have a great introduction. Now, what I'll say, though, is if you're reading a volume that has notes, and another volume which doesn't have too many notes, but is beautiful, is the Everyman. I like the Everymans. Resist the temptation to look at annotations, notes, or any introductory work, or any commentary whatsoever when coming to a sonnet. You have got a sonnet before you. So you've got number 30. "When to the sessions of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past." Read the sonnet through completely in its entirety, even if you don't understand it. And you won't fully understand everything, because even back in the day when they were written, people surely could not have comprehended the weight behind each and every word. Shakespeare's art, by the way, one of his arts, is the art of ellipsis. What's ellipsis? Ellipsis means leaving things out. When you come to a sonnet, there is more that's not being said. There's a story that's happened that you have not been privy to. And this sonnet is the manifestation of that. And that's why his plays are so good. Go see a Shakespeare play, or crack open anyone that you like. Merchant of Venice, problematic plays, Midsummer Night's Dream, whatever. You come to these plays and they begin in medias res, in the middle of things. These plays, they experiment so endlessly with the concepts of time Like Romeo and Juliet, how quickly does that all happen? Time is a weird construct in the plays, but for some reason we buy it, we accept it, we buy into all the magic and the enchantment, and we really suspend, willingly, our sense of disbelief. And that's his art. He creates a world that's already there, fully formed, before the stage is peopled with characters. And that's what's great about the sonnets, is the sense of something being there that's not there on the page. He does this in many ways. He does this by leaving things out. He does this by being the contrarian, right? Where he will try to create an effect by leaning into its opposite. So you'll see a lot of opposition, parallelism in the sonnets. And let's talk about, so that's your homework assignment. I want you to really enjoy the sonnets. Try and find 10 that you like. And once you've gone through them all and you've got 10, you'll have more than 10. Well, trust me, you'll have more than 10. That's the thing about the sonnets, is this is why they're such a fantastic artistic achievement, is because they are consistently brilliant. There's only a handful that could be said to be anything except amazing. And the good ones are sublime in every sense of the word. So, let's get into it. Let's talk about, firstly, why did Shakespeare start writing the sonnets, and when did he start writing the sonnets? It's always a problematic trying to date Shakespeare, and this is not actually, it's not my, although I do find it interesting personally, it's not my area of supreme interest. In the same way that, for example, when you read the sonnets, some people will read the sonnets and they'll try to look for clues for Shakespeare's sexuality, homosexuality, bisexuality. There's, in the sequence, the first 126 sonnets are addressed to a young man, fair youth, and so a lot of people will say that that's evidence of homosexuality. And then the remaining sonnets are addressed or preoccupied with a figure known as the Dark Lady. Now, a lot of academics will try to, and people like Anthony Burgess have gone down this route. A lot of people stipulate that this Dark Lady, rather than just being a brunette that Shakespeare was infatuated with, was in fact a sex worker from East India, whom he shared with the fair youth in the preceding sonnets. Indeed, there's evidence that he contracted some sort of disease, syphilis perhaps, from this lady. Anyway, in addition to not being supremely interested in the dating of the different works, although it is interesting, I'm also not interested in academic gossip. Now, some people might be interested in this, and that's fine. But the way I read into the sonnets, I take them as you might when you sit down and read and listen to a symphony, Beethoven. Someone who knows music, who appreciates music, somebody who the rhythm of their soul speaks in music, they're going to fully immerse themselves in a symphony, aren't they? And they're not going to sit down and think, oh, this part of the symphony obviously belies the fact that Beethoven was this, that, or the other. Misogynistic, homosexual, infatuated with this person. We can talk about that a little bit, but I don't think they're the supreme interest. But suffice to say, the sonnets, I think Shakespeare started writing the sonnets because he was in the Elizabethan version of lockdown, quarantine. Plague was kicking off and all the theatres shut. He would have put on, I think this was around the time that he'd just finished the Henry cycle, the first 3 Henrys, Richard III. These weren't the best plays that he would go on to craft. His first masterpiece would be A Midsummer Night's Dream, which will come many years later. He'd just put on Titus Andronicus, which was a send-up, a parody of Marlowe, Christopher Marlowe. And we'll talk a little bit about Marlowe because in the sonnets, one of the 4 personas is the rival poet, which is a composite of many poets, but predominantly Marlowe, I think. So Titus Andronicus is a parody of this blood banquet, revenge tragedy. And he would have put this on maybe 2-3 times. Once in the Rose Theatre, a couple of times in a tavern, and then shut down because of plague. So what's the person to do? What's Shakespeare to do when the theatres are closed? We do know that he had one of his best years where he wrote 4 of the greatest tragedies, including King Lear, during a plague year many years later. So when Shakespeare goes into lockdown, he comes out with some masterpieces. It would be amazing just to think, and we know from different documents and stuff that he would have been writing perhaps late at night by candlelight. To think that he was in lockdown in London with everything boarded up, shuttered up, writing by candlelight at night, penning these sonnets. So we can kind of see as well, like around the time he was writing Romeo and Juliet, 1595-ish, give or take a few years, we can see that he is preoccupied with the sonnet form, so much so that its influence is starting to bleed into the plays themselves. So if we look at Act 1, Scene 5, where Romeo and Juliet meet just before they kiss, these two lovers are speaking in sonnets, or a sonnet to each other, punctuated, ending the sonnet with a kiss. Beautiful. He also, you can see in Love's Labour's Lost, around the same sort of time, which is an explosion of language, you can see the characters speaking in sonnets, but that's sort of like parodying the sonnets. Sonnets at the time were sort of frivolous ditties to people's loves, and Shakespeare, with the sonnets, he would turn a lot of conventions on their head. So when a lot of his contemporary poets were writing sonnets saying, my mistress's eyes are like the sun, she's got beautiful coral, ruby red lips, Shakespeare said, screw that, my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. He used the sonnets, every single sonnet, to experiment endlessly. Not generic, not basic, always the innovator. We can see that in his linguistic contraptions, his verbal devices, we can see that in his deployment of metaphors. Shakespeare can always wear different garbs. One sonnet he's an architect, next sonnet he's a seafarer, next sonnet he's an astrologer, next sonnet he's a doctor, next sonnet he's, I don't know. Go through the sonnets and you'll start seeing the whole range and gamut and different colours of human experience, emotion, proclivity. And that's why they're so good. Anyway, look, if we go to Romeo and Juliet. Romeo, he says to Juliet,
if I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this, my lips, two blushing pilgrims ready stand, to smooth the rough touch with a gentle kiss.
if I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this, my lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand, to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. So he speaks 4 lines. A sonnet is comprised of 14 lines, okay, in iambic pentameter. 5 beats to a line. This is the rhythm and breath of English. French is different. It's more quantitative, syllabic. Greek is different. It's more about duration, because it depends on the language. Now, if you go over to the Asian languages, Japanese and Chinese, they're going to be different as well. Chinese languages are tonal. Japanese has a sort of tonality, but then you get into the writing and it's pictographs. So every language has different modulations that are perfect for its poetry. Iambic pentameter is perfect for English. And Shakespeare lived and breathed it. He probably thought in it. His characters spoke in it. We can even see some of his plays where characters are speaking in prose, that he probably originally wrote it in iambic pentameter. What's iambic pentameter? Iam is one sort of foot, metrical foot, unstress go to stress. Da-dum, and you do that 5 times over. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. That's a line. That's perfect for the human breath in poetry anyway. So 14 lines of that. The sonnet has developed, the English form developed from the Italian form. Now the Italian form, also 14 lines, but because of the rhyming structure, we don't have that many rhymes in English that would be suitable. So actually writing in the Italian version would be very, very hard. And the Italian, the 14 lines are broken into 2 parts, whereas the English is more a 3-parter in a sense. So you've got the octave, and you can probably tell from the etymology of the word that that's the first 8 lines, okay? Then you've got the sestet, the remaining 6 lines. But the last 2 lines of that sestet end on a couplet. It goes like this: A, B, A, B. First 4 lines, quatrain. Next one, C, D, C, D. Next 4 lines, octave complete. Then the sestet. You've got another alternating rhyme scheme, E, F, E, F. Boom, end on a couplet. GG. And what's great about that is because you can end sort of aphoristically, or like an aphorism, like a maxim. So you can sound really proverbial. And so you've got the octave, sets up the problem. Now the Italian form was just two parts: question, answer, problem, solution, moral problem, solution. English is like three parts. So you've got the octave, big old problem, and then you get to a turning point around line 8, but it could be in line 9, around there. It's called the volta, okay? And that means turn. So you outline this big old problem, think through the problems. So this is, in the sonnets, you can see Shakespeare, but we'll get into that because it's not actually Shakespeare. It's a constructed persona, thinking through a problem. And then, because humans are always variable, our minds change, our emotions change, and when we think things through, we change. You get to the volta, turn, and it turns on its head for the sestet. And then, boom, boom, you end on a pithy couplet. Anyway, so we're seeing this creation, the two lovers creating a sonnet. So we just read Romeo, and then Juliet picks it up with the next 4 lines.
Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much. Which mannerly devotion shows in this? For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss.
Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much. Which mannerly devotion shows in this? For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. Can you see the alternating rhyme? And then Romeo, we're going into the sestet now. He says, have not saints lips, and holy palmers too? Juliet, I pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer.
Have not saints lips, and holy palmers too?
I pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer.
Now, Romeo's going to pick up and rhyme with the line he just said. Oh then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. And then he rhymes with Juliet. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair. Now this oh then, that's the volta. That's the turning point. That's like, right, we've reached a fork in the road. And usually you can tell the volta because Shakespeare will use a word like yet, though, but, something of that nature, right? So you look out around line 8 or 9, once the octave's complete, and you'll see the pivot. Now this is why they're endlessly, you're able to endlessly read into the sonnets, because it's variation in human experience. It's thinking through things and changing your mind based on thought.
Oh then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair.
And then Juliet and Romeo finish it off with a couplet which they share. Juliet says, saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake. Then move, says Romeo, not while my prayer's effect I take. And then they kiss. Wonderful. So he was writing Romeo and Juliet and he was thinking in sonnets.
Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake.
Then move not. While my prayer's effect I take. Thus, from my lips, by thine, my sin is purged.
Now let's look at the sonnet form in one of my personal favourite sonnets. This is sonnet 29. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy, contented least. Yet in these thoughts, myself almost despising, Haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising, from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. Okay, so kin, this is beautiful. It's musical. It's a thinking through of an issue, and it demonstrates everything that we just said. All right, so can you see where the volta is in this one? Yet. Now, if you look at what line that is, that's 9. Yep, 9. So around 9, 8 or 9. Yet. So he says all these things. Oh, I'm, got all these problems. Yet, and here's the crux, this is the term, but all of this is irrelevant when I think on thee. And what's funny is the sonnets, are they love poems? I think it might be a bit too simplistic to say so, because this is written to the young man, a patron. Now, luckily, Shakespeare went into Elizabethan lockdown. He couldn't write any more plays, but he did have a patron, the Earl of Southampton, Henry Wriothesley, if that's how you pronounce his name. We think he might have been the patron for the sonnets. He definitely was the patron for Venus and Adonis, good poem, and he definitely was the patron for the rape of Lucrece. Shakespeare was working in all these sort of aristocratic circles. He had friends in high places. Luckily, he didn't get subsumed by the sort of underbelly of the Elizabethan Secret Service world, like Marlowe, who ended up dying, basically probably being assassinated, although it looked as though he was impaled on his own sword. But so basically, Shakespeare's in lockdown for about a year. He kicks off the sonnets, and the thing is, he's writing these sonnets across the length of his career. He writes them all through the ages, all through a couple of decades, and then he puts them into an order. Now, it's debated whether the order we're reading them in is the order that Shakespeare put them in, although I think probably, or at least it's very, very close, or if publishers soon after if publishers put the order themselves. But anyway, let's look back at this form. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, yeah, look at the line, the rhyme, eyes. A, I all alone beweep my outcast state. B, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries. A, and look upon myself and curse my fate. B. A, B, A, B. And what Shakespeare chooses to end the line with and rhyme with is significant. Eyes rhymes with cries. State rhymes with fate. And then go on. Wishing me like to one more rich in hope. C. Features like him with friends possessed. D. Desiring this man's art and that man's scope. C. With what I most enjoy, contented least. D. Hope, scope, possessed, least. Okay, and the rhymes aren't going to be exact because sometimes Shakespeare will deliberately not rhyme exactly, do a half rhyme, do a sight rhyme, or the language has shifted over the years. So sometimes we'll see things that they no longer rhyme, but they did in Shakespeare's day. We are not speaking. My accent right now is not the accent that Shakespeare would have had. Shakespeare's accent would have been closer to a sort of an amalgamation of, if you can imagine it, a blend of Welsh, American, sort of West Country, Bristol, and then a little bit of probably Cockney and stuff like that. But it's hard to conceptualise that. Anyway, so you can kind of see the structure, and you can see, if we go to the end, once you've gone through the octave and sestet and the alternating rhymes and the volta, also you can see I all alone beweep my outcast state. Iambic pentameter. So look at the final lines. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. And the thing is, when you're looking for these sonnets, you're reading them in sequence and you're keeping an eye out for those that resonate most deeply with you. There'll be entrance points to the sonnet. So for example, I remember a decade ago, my entrance point to this sonnet, which I've read probably, I can't tell you how many times I've read it because I'm endlessly rereading it. And also, here's the thing, once you possess a sonnet or any poem by memory, you can rereading becomes different because it's just part of your soul. Now, you'll have flashes and snippets and glimpses of the poem and the work running in the background of your mind as you live your life. That's the kind of reading that they don't really teach you how to do in school. But anyway, so when I first came to this, I really liked the third line. Trouble, death, heaven, with my bootless cries. All I knew was I liked it. And then when you read it 10 more times, you start to think, well, why do I like it? Firstly, death, heaven, I thought, well, that assonance is nice. Okay, that's surface level, assonance. Repetition of vowels. If you repeat consonants, then it's called alliteration. But this is assonance. Death, heaven. That's nice. Okay? Like I said before, in various capacities, when Ezra Pound talked about great literature, he said great literature is simply language charged with meaning to the utmost possible degree. And there's 3 ways to charge language with meaning. You can do it phanopia, which is the visual projection or the throwing of an image upon the mind's eye, imagery. Melopia, that's melody, just nice sounds, musical, oral, great. Because poems, if they get too far away from the condition of song and dance, they fail to be poetry, I think. And logopia, which is basically just verbal contraptions, okay? Metaphors, shades of ambiguity. And so that's why we like assonance, that's why we like alliteration. Poetry allows you to think in ways that are very unconventional, that people would call you crazy if you were to think in those ways typically. But we humans, we do think in these ways, and we've lost touch with them. That's why if you ever have a dream, look at dreams. And Shakespeare was preoccupied with dreams, he was preoccupied with magic and fantasy and unreality. If we look at dreams, they do hold meaning. We can go into Jungian psychology, and we can look at archetypes, we can look at symbols. Now, there's a language to dreams, but if you ever tell a dream to somebody, nobody expects anybody to take a dream seriously. They just say, wow, that's crazy, it's a crazy dream. Aren't dreams funny? They don't mean anything. No, just our unconscious mind works in different ways. Now, the same way that we think through our problems in dreams, the same way that our unconscious thinks through our problems, is the same way we can think through our problems and engage with a deeper layer of human experience in poetry. Of course, all literature, but there's stages, isn't there? And the great thing about a sonnet, if we go back to the form, is the constraint. Okay, the fact that there are physical, metrical constraints upon the form. We know it's 14 lines. We know there's alternating rhyme schemes, for the octave, sestet, and ends on a couplet. We know it's in iambic pentameter. There's a couple of sonnets where Shakespeare doesn't do that, but he's self-consciously breaking away from the form, perhaps. But for the most part, you have to follow these rules. Constraint leads to freedom. So you couldn't just have a complete outspilling. Now imagine if you had the same poem, number 29, without any constraint. It wouldn't be impressive, it wouldn't be marvellous, it wouldn't be beautiful, because it would just be an outpouring of noise. So it's amazing, really, that Shakespeare can push the constraints of the form to their absolute limits. And if you look, every word matters. Every word matters. Anyway, and then when you get deeper, so I thought that was the reason that I liked number 29. And then, you read it across the years, and the things that resonate with you change necessarily. So, for example, I like the next line now, and look upon myself. Okay? That is why when people say the Shakespeare sonnets are the most personal, they're not really. Shakespeare is putting up a distance, and yes, he'll touch upon these enduring, everlasting, evergreen themes of humanity: betrayal, love, loss, pride, ambition, virtue and vice. But he's holding us at a distance, and the speaker is a construct. So when he talks about looking upon himself, he's looking upon whatever he manages to trap on the page, which, in all honesty, always leaves us wanting more. I'll give you a quote from Harold Bloom that demonstrates Shakespeare's art. I like this a lot. He says, "Only one human is invented in the sonnets, and he is not quite a representation of Shakespeare himself. Self-same with Shakespeare he is not. yet he lingers near Shakespeare and fascinates us by that proximity. Okay? Anyway, so I like that. And then if you go down a bit further, featured like him. Like him. Now that repetition says more than all the other loaded words, in my opinion. There's a lot of loaded words here. Fortune, fate, hope, scope. But this like him, you can ponder and meditate and think about and engage with the times when you have felt yourself so preoccupied, like thinking in circles, obsessively, about what other people have. Okay? And as you do that, and you get further into the sonnet, then it flips. But anyway, this is just scratching the surface of a great sonnet. I'm gonna give you a quote from W.H. Auden. Okay? Because W.H. Auden, he says when he's reading poems, he asks himself two questions. And I think this is really pertinent to consider these questions when you're reading the sonnets, okay? The questions, this is Auden, the questions which interest me most when reading a poem are two. The first is technical. Here is a verbal contraption. How does it work? The second is, in the broadest sense, moral. What kind of guy inhabits this poem? What is his notion of the good life or the good place? His notion of the evil one? What does he conceal from the reader? What does he conceal even from himself? These are two great questions to go into any poem, but specifically Shakespeare's sonnets. You can look at the verbal contraptions, and they can keep you endlessly preoccupied. You can delight in them endlessly. And that should be an end in itself with the sonnets. And there's no social utility to the sonnets outside of whatever personal transformation you can engage with yourself when reading them. The pleasure itself is enough. Shakespeare, a lot of people say, oh, we don't know Shakespeare, we don't know his politics, we don't know his religion. Because obviously, if he was to venture anything concrete on that, he might get in a lot of trouble. Elizabethan censorship was rife and it was dangerous. He had contemporary friends, other playwrights, who tried to make allegories out of the Queen, and they'd end up in the Tower of London with their, being threatened to have their ears and tongue cut off. So we don't know anything about Shakespeare. He's everyone and nothing at the same time. So actually, there doesn't need to be social utility to the sonnets. Your pleasure in them is enough, and some of these verbal contraptions are just beautiful. It's like when you listen to a great jazz record or a great classical record, and you hear Thelonious Monk do something amazing on the piano. Does it matter? Does anything else matter? Does his sexuality matter? Does his gender? Does his race? Does anything matter other than the enjoyment of that every single time it brings it to you? And the measure of its worth, the estimation, the value is how many times you can hear that and not get bored of it and get endless amounts of pleasure from it. And that's what you can get from Shakespeare. And of course, yes, you can go down the moral route as well. And I think those questions, what does he conceal from the reader? Very interesting, because like I said, Shakespeare's art is the art of ellipsis, it's the art of leaving things out. It's the art of irony, subtlety, implication. Sometimes we read Shakespeare, we watch Shakespeare, we go see Hamlet, and every single thing that's being said is the complete opposite to what the characters are actually meaning and thinking and aiming at. That's amazing. That's like real life. And Shakespeare was basically the first person to do that, the first writer to do it well, consistently. And what does he conceal from himself? So these are receptacles, small receptacles, endlessly able to be read into, that continuously offer up something valuable to you, the reader. So we're going to keep those questions in mind as we go through. Let's talk about the sequence, all right? So the first 126 sonnets are, like I said, they're for a fair youth, and then 127 to 154 are to the dark lady, okay? Now the first 17 sonnets are known as the procreation sonnets. And there is some academic speculation that some patrons commissioned Shakespeare to write a few sonnets to their son who scorned marriage and making babies. They said, basically, we want him to settle down and, start a family. So that would be consistent if you read the first 17. So when you're reading the first 17 sonnets, when you're reading them in sequence, keep in mind these are the procreation sonnets, and these are not to a woman. They can be read as though addressed to a woman, and because they are sonnets, many people do, and that's fine. We can read them that way if we like. But what I will say is, many women will get offended by sonnet number 2 in particular. And it is quite offensive, really, if you think about it. Let's look at it. But this is actually addressed to a man, all right? Or we think it's probably, in all likelihood, addressed to a man. Is it still offensive? Okay, let's read it together. Number 2. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. Then being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say, within thine own deep-sunken eyes, were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count, and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feelst it cold. Okay, what's he saying here? He's saying, well, you're going to get old, your beauty's going to expire, it's going to fade, and look at the metaphorical language. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field. Beauty, an abstract concept, conceptualized as a field, or having a field, being a field, having a field. We can see that. We can see trenches, and then it's married with the physical manifestation of who he's speaking to. Brow. 40 winters. Yeah, 40 winters will pass, but emphasis on winters, it's cold. Decay, crawling towards death. Besiege thy brow, it's a war. So crawling ever closer towards death is like being besieged, and physical accruement. Dig deep trenches. So the act of digging deep trenches, so wrinkles, okay? And we can see it. It's so visually evocative. He's saying, right, let's say this youth is 20 now, 20-ish. 40 winters? That's ambitious if you get to 60. At that time, Shakespeare himself, I think, died around 44. That's more average age. People just shuffled off the mortal coil for any reason, basically. It was, if plague didn't get you, something else would. Typhus, maybe. So he's saying, look, you're gonna age, you're gonna get old, physically you're gonna decline. So the only way to remedy that and to keep your beauty alive is to have a child. Now, obviously, if you take this as being addressed to a woman, it's offensive because women will say, well, the only estimation of my worth is my beauty until I go on to childbearing years. Well, those women can be quiet because this is actually probably addressed to a bloke, and it's also a bit tongue-in-cheek. Yes, he might have been commissioned to write this, but everything in the sonnets is a bit of a game. It's not serious. I mean, it's semi-serious, but Shakespeare's thinking through things, okay? And it's a chart, it's a journey. His thoughts change on different things as the sonnets progress. There's 154 of them, written across a couple of decades. Nothing is static. They are just there to be a beautiful ponderance for you. Anyway, if you look at the very first sonnet, from fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die. Beauty is a rose, or has a rose, and then in the second sonnet has a field. Okay, it's easy to conceptualize. But as the riper should by time decease, his tender air might bear his memory. But thou, contracted to thine own bright eyes, feeds thy light's flame with self-substantial fuel, making a famine where abundance lies, thyself thy foe, to thy sweet self too cruel. Thou that art now the world's fresh ornament, and only herald to the gaudy spring, within thine own bud buryest thy content, and, tender churl, makes waste in niggardin. Pity the world, or else this glutton be, to eat the world's due by the grave and thee. He's saying, make a baby. That's what he's saying. And he's going to say that for 17 more sonnets. So when you're reading the sequence and you're reading the first 126, you're dealing with the fair youth or the young man, okay? Then it goes on to the dark lady. Then we also, another persona that we have in the sonnets, there's 4 personas. We have the rival poet. Now, personally, I think this is a composite of many poets at the time, George Chapman, Christopher Marlowe, but I think it's predominantly Marlowe. And then we have the speaker himself, which is not Shakespeare, but an approximation of Shakespeare, or Shakespeare playing a role. And the roles are different depending on the sonnet. But the sonnets are reflective of his human experience at the time. So you'll come to some sonnets and Shakespeare is tired, and the art of ellipsis is very much present because you wonder what has happened. There are some sonnets where the very fact that he's writing what he's writing says a whole story that is beyond our sight. We just know that perhaps people have been spreading rumours about him, okay? Or somebody's rejected him, or he's had an argument. But we don't know that directly. We just know that. It's a journey as we go through the sonnets, similar to Proust. And if we're talking about Proust, and the thing is, if you ever want to read À la recherche de temps perdu, In Search of Lost Time, which wrongfully took a quote from Shakespeare, the translation anyway, Remembrance of Things Past, if you want to read and appreciate that, then the sonnets are basically doing the same thing. Okay, and there's a Proustian quote that is really relevant. Our social personality is a creation of the thoughts of other people. So people say, is it Shakespeare? Not really. Whatever social personality we see in the sonnets is a creation that we have brought to the sonnets. Everything we see in the sonnets is not put there by Shakespeare. He's just put the potential for many things to be seen. It's a prism. That's why so many people can read the sonnets and have different favourite ones, and like different ones, hate different ones, and come away with different thoughts, because we're all different. We all have different experiences, different cultural upbringings. So that's something to keep in mind. Right, let's look at another representation of one of Shakespeare's sonnets to the fair youth or the young man. This is Sonnet 20. A woman's face, with nature's own hand painted, hast thou, the master, mistress of my passion. A woman's gentle heart, but not acquainted with shifting change, as is false women's fashion. An eye more bright than theirs, less false in rolling, gilding the object whereupon it gazeth. A man in hue, all hues in his controlling, which steals men's eyes and women's souls amazeth. And for a woman wert thou first created, till nature as she wrought thee fell a doting. And by addition, me of thee defeated, by adding one thing to my purpose, nothing. But since she pricked thee out for women's pleasure, mine be thy love, and thy love's use their treasure. Okay, so he's talking to this young gent, telling him how he's essentially more beautiful than a woman. Now, I want to point out one artifice that is a nice if we're going to just find one representation or one reflection of Shakespeare's artistry, one way that he uses his sonnets as a playground, as an experimenting ground, as a laboratory with language. Look at the ending of each rhyme. Well, not each rhyme, each line, okay? Painted, passion. Acquainted, fashion. Rolling, gazeth, controlling, amazeth. Created, a doting. Defeated, nothing. Pleasure, treasure. So these are called feminine rhymes. A rhyme can be masculine or feminine. If it's masculine, it ends on a stressed syllable. Now, there's nothing to do with moral purpose here. There's no judgment of worth. It's not good or bad. It's just unstressed is called a feminine rhyme in poetry, and stressed is masculine. So if he had ended the first line with paint, which he does for most of his sonnets, he ends them on a strong masculine rhyme, that would have been quite typical. Or let's look at another one. Gaze. Okay, but he doesn't. He says painted, gazeth, it, passion, acquainted, fashion, rolling. So the emphasis is on roll, We don't emphasise ing endings in English, because it's irrelevant to the meaning. Ing could be put onto many words. Role contains the meaning. But he wants to create this image of femininity, created femininity, but the artifice of femininity. So he's deploying the feminine rhyme strategically throughout the sonnet in order to provide a sort of linguistic metaphor for looking feminine, like a woman's face, with nature's own hand painted. Shakespeare himself is nature. His sonnets arise from nature, from the natural world, from the extension of nature, which is himself. And he is painting the fair young man, the fair youth. Okay? He doesn't talk about the dark lady in this way. Look at this, and Shakespeare always the contrarian, always seeing duality, opposite, and using it to create meaning, or just pleasure. He calls the fair youth the master mistress of my passion. Master mistress, side by side. And there's something really, really pleasurable about that. Master mistress, this androgyny, right there in the second line. Yeah, so let's look at how he talks about the dark lady. Now, number 20 is one you might want to pursue more. It's one of my favourites. You might want to read it over and over again. There's a lot more artifice in it. There's a lot more ornament. There's a lot more clever, pretty phrases. So if you do read it, and you will, because you have to read them in sequence, that is the reading assignment, when you come to it, pause. It might not be one of your favourites. It's in my top 10, definitely my top 20. Might not be one of yours, but pause a little bit and try and find some of the other artifice, the other linguistic tricks that appeal to you. Alright, what should we look at for the fair lady so we can see the contrast, okay? Let's go to 130. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground, and yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. So if you look at the way he is talking about his mistress, this is the art of ellipsis, okay? This is a story that's not being told, because in an alternate universe there is a poem, and we can go back into Elizabethan courtly love poetry. We can look at the other sonnets from the other basic poets, the extra poets, and there is a poem in this alternate universe that says, my mistress's eyes are like the sun. Her lips are coral red. Her breasts are snow white. Okay, and Shakespeare says no. And this is him playing. He's playing with the courtly tradition, the generic condition. He's turning it on its head. Which in a sense, which is funny because like we said, if women typically don't like sonnet number 2, not that it was addressed to them, but realistically, the way he talks to that fair youth seems to be more enamoured than he does. There's more reality with the dark lady than the fair youth. And this is a dose of reality. The fair youth, he seems to prize his friendship with this male above his relationship with this female, which is something that would have been the case in Elizabethan times. Male friendship was more highly praised. And I think we can see that demonstrated in Sonnet 144, where he combines both personas. You can see the conflict, the drama. Again, everything is left out. The art of ellipsis. The story that's not being told. So like in that sonnet that we just looked at, the story that's not being told is the poem that embraces all of these courtly love traditions and deploys all these cliche metaphors. But But if you go to Sonnet 144, he says, "Two loves I have, of comfort and despair, which like two spirits do suggest me still. The better angel is a man right fair, the worser spirit a woman coloured ill. To win me soon to hell, my female evil tempteth my better angel from my side, and would corrupt my saint to be a devil, wooing his purity with her foul pride. And whether that my angel be turned fiend, suspect I may, yet not directly tell. But being both from me, both to each friend, I guess one angel in another's hell. Yet this shall I ne'er know, but live in doubt, till my bad angel fire my good one out." This is a drama, this is conflict. You can almost see the angel on one shoulder, the devil on the other. And if he's talking about his two loves, one is of comfort and one is of despair, it seems that this dark lady of the end of the sequence of the sonnets is responsible for his despair. And he prizes his relationship with this male, whoever it was, his patron, above that of the dark lady. So it's funny when people think the sonnets are a sequence of romantic poetry. If we hold male friendship, Aristotelian friendship, to be, in the Elizabethan sense, something more praiseworthy than an actual romantic between a man and a woman relationship, then perhaps. But it's more complicated than that, because that's why we read the sonnets, not because they're just simply expressions of love. There are some great love poems in the sonnets, some great sentiments in regards to love, but that is the surface, and that is also part of the constraint, I think. So you've got the constraint in the metrical sense, and then you've got the constraint in the sense of the ostensible subject. But every other subject, every other colour of human experience and emotion, and all the different shades that each one can then permutate into, then latches on to that. So really they're not love poems, they're poems for every shifting mood, every shifting change of human experience. Now we're going to look at a poem that deals with another persona, the rival poet, and then after that we're going to look at some of the sonnets that deal with the speaker, and will further show the art of ellipsis and the art of detachment. So Shakespeare's dealing with these enduring human themes and preoccupation, but he always keeps us at arm's length. So let's look at the rival poet. There's a few sonnets that talk about the rival poet, but let's turn to 86. Okay, I'm saving the best for last. We'll look at some of my absolute favourites shortly. But at 86, he says, "Was it the proud, full sail of his great verse, bound for the prize of all too precious you, that did my ripe thoughts in my brain inhearse, making their tomb the womb wherein they grew? Was it his spirit, by spirits taught to write above a mortal pitch, that struck me dead? No, neither he nor his compeers by night, giving him aid my verse astonished, he nor that affable familiar ghost, which nightly gulls him with intelligence. As victors of my silence cannot boast, I was not sick of any fear from thence, but when your countenance filled up his line, then I lacked matter, that enfeebled mine." So this is where you see shades, or nuanced shades, of human emotion, because he is getting jealous that the young man, his friend, he's getting jealous because another poet wrote about him. So this is beyond the remit of his friend's control, somewhat. We don't know what's happened here. All we know is that Shakespeare has read a poem that seems to praise this person, that up until this point he's just written 86 sonnets, 85 before this one, about this man, and that kills his inspiration, stops it dead. Let's look at another one. Let's look at 121. No, actually, we're going to look at 66, then 121, because 121 is one of my favourites. Okay, we turn to 66. Now, the reason I like this one is because it's messy. And there's a few examples of Shakespearean sonnets that are messy, that deliberately don't fit or deliberately resist the structure. And if you read them in sequence, you'll come across them. So if you find them, let me know what you think they are. There's some Easter eggs there. You'll find some ones where you go, whoa, didn't expect that. But 66, I'm not going to call it sloppy because every word counts, but it's deliberately creating an artifice that replicates being tired, being fed up, and it's a procession of vices that grows in severity, a procession of sins. It's like a masquerade of human garbage, according to Shakespeare. Obviously, 6, a procession of sixes, 666. 6 is the mark of the beast. So maybe he got to Sonnet 66 and thought, right, not something pretty anymore. We're going to catalogue all the things that make me weary. And that's why when you get to the end of 66, it's like he throws something in there that says, well, this is still a love poem. But it's not a love poem. Let's read it, okay? Number 66. Tired with all these, for restful death I cry, as to behold desert a beggar born, and needy nothing trimmed in jollity, and purest faith unhappily forsworn, and gilded honour shamefully misplaced, and maiden virtue rudely strumpeted, and right perfection wrongfully disgraced, and strength by limping sway disabled, and art made tongue-tied by authority, and folly doctor-like, controlling skill, and simple truth miscalled simplicity, and captive good attending captain ill. Tired with all these, from these I would be gone, save that to die I leave my love alone. Okay, so firstly, there's archaic constructions, archaic language. So if you don't know the full meaning of each one, that's fine. The sentiment kind of, you know what he's saying. He's moaning about all the things he doesn't like in the world. But the first thing that I think leaps out to anybody that reads this is the repetition from line 3 onwards, basically through the entire poem, and. If this was not deliberate, it would be really sloppy. But we know it's not deliberate because no poet would use and deploy it that consistently across that many lines, one after the other. Of course it's deliberate. But of course, if a poet overuses and with no sense of it reinforcing the meaning of the poem, then it's bad. But he wants you to be tired. In fact, the very first word of this poem is tired. And then once he's catalogued everything, and, he says tired again. Okay? So he's trying to induce tiredness in us, the reader. Okay? And he basically catalogues all the sins that he doesn't like, all the vices. And first you have just victims. Victim. And then you start to ask yourself, well, who's the perpetrator? Because that's the next logical question. Okay? And then he gives you perpetrator. And this, as much as any of the greatest sonnets, which I believe this is one, but I've not seen many people talk about this, if anybody, is the ability for this to be a mirror. So you can ask yourself, you can go through and ask yourself which one of these resonates with you most this year. Then do it again next year. Wherever you are in your current station in life, one of these lines is going to resonate with you stronger than other ones. And in all honesty, the more, if you resonate with the ones towards the end of the poem, more than the beginning, you might have had a bad year, or you might have had a really good year because it's crystallized a lot of deep philosophical thought in you. So he says, I'm tired with all these, so I might as well die. First, to behold desert a beggar born. Basically, desert a beggar born, that's like someone deserving who doesn't get what they deserve. Okay. And the next one, needy nothing trimmed in jollity. Basically, somebody who's trying to dress up to the nines, trying to be a bit more flash than they actually are. Basically, superficiality. Okay, needy nothing. Purest faith, unhappily forsworn. Currently shooting this in the wake of New Year's. People do New Year's resolutions. People always swear to change, but the only thing that they seemingly keep consistent with is their inability to actually keep their promises. We've all had this experience. We all know people who say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and they never do. And that's annoying. But hey, there's many more annoying things to come in this poem, because that's at the top. All right, gilded honour shamefully misplaced, and look at the internal rhyme: purest faith, and then the next line, misplaced. Every word counts. There's integrations. You can make an oral map. You can literally spiderweb internally throughout the poem and find these recurring rhymes. And every recurring rhyme latches on to a word that you could consider endlessly. Purest faith. Okay? Maiden virtue, rudely strumpeted. Okay? Somebody who perhaps possesses virginal qualities, then, deciding that their worth is nothing. Maybe they want to go into the gutter with their values. But look at the word strumpeted. Every word is carefully selected in order to connote, suggest something that the word doesn't directly say. Strumpeted, a strumpet, a harlot, a whore. But strumpeted, if you just take that S off, it sounds like trumpeted. So without Shakespeare having to say trumpeted, he's now conveying this sense of it being broadcast. Somebody's, vice-like nature being broadcast to the world. And we know he's thinking about this because he's talking about needy nothing trimmed in jollity, maiden virtue, rudely strumpeted. So, sounds like trumpeted. That's great. The one that resonated with me, at least when I read this in 2020, which was an awful year for a lot of people, is Strength by Limping Sway Disabled. Why am I saying disabled? Because I've come to the conclusion that it's not pronounced disabled because of the way the rhyme is. But initially I thought, hang on, that doesn't rhyme. Strumpeted, disabled. So I thought, is that actually like a linguistic, lexical metaphor? So he wants the word itself to seem like the disability which he's trying to talk about. But then I thought, actually, it probably does fit within the metrical scheme. It's probably disabled, but it's not... It still connotes that sense of disability a little bit, doesn't it? Strength by limping sway disabled. Okay, so strength. You're strong. You're robust. But limping sway, authority. Somebody who has power over you, but is not strong. Now, what do you mean by strength? Do you mean physical, emotional, moral? Who knows? It's a mirror. It's up to you to decide. Disabled. So I think a lot of people this year not this year, sorry, in 2020, a lot of people who went into 2020 set up and, with everything necessary to prosper, would then be disabled by limping sway. And again, how he describes these, or makes you visualize these abstract notions. The idea of sway, that's abstract. Limping is not. So in a sense, you're seeing a limp. Interesting. And so what you can do as well is when you go through this poem, but definitely any other of the sonnets as well, each line you can probably assign a person. You can assign whether that's someone close to you or somebody you just know, perhaps you've seen on the television, read in a book, or an event. So for me, when I saw needy nothing, trimmed in jollity, I thought of a lot of people that I went to school with. Where I went to school had I'm not going to say the exact place, but easy transport links to London. Needy nothing trimmed in jollity. Summed up a lot of people I went to school with. Okay, so. And art made tongue-tied by authority. Censorship. We're talking about censorship here. And we're crying all the time about censorship today, but this is nothing new. And I think Shakespeare would have been way more heavily censored. When he was writing plays, there was actually someone whose job it was to go through and say, you can't say this, you've got to change this. So all of his plays, Shakespeare is everybody and nobody, of course he is. The censorship is rampant in the time that he's writing, okay? And I like this one, okay? And simple truth miscalled simplicity. Can you identify with that? Sometimes the greatest pleasure with the sonnets is slowing down and asking yourself if you can identify, bringing your own experience to bear on it. Simple truth called simplicity. Simplicity, stupidity. So have you ever said something that's common sense, that you think should be taken for granted, like it's not too controversial, this just seems normal, and people call you an idiot? I think we've all had that experience. It's a frustrating one. It's so frustrating that Shakespeare puts it at the end of the catalogue, at the end of the procession, but not at the very end, because the very last one captive good, attending, captive ill. And he says, I've got to put up with all this, because if I don't, then I can't have my love. So essentially, your love can be perfect. You can be perfect for each other. But the world, in this catalogue of sins, it's not going to be perfect around you. It's not going to be perfect for you. It's going to throw some spanners in the works. And you've got to put up with them. If you want them, the nice stuff, you want the love, you've got to put up with them. Okay? This is a mirror. I love this one. Let's look at another one. Now we're looking at one of my favourites, 121. 'Tis better to be vile than vile esteemed. And now if you can see this, I want you to look at what my page looks like. Okay? This is also how you read the sonnets. First reading, you don't look at any annotations or explanations, don't look anything up. Just enjoy it, read it out loud, okay? Or try to hear someone reading it. Then you might want to read it a couple more times through. Then you start looking at the annotations, this sort of stuff, explanations, and then start getting your pen or pencil ready. Start circling things. There's no right answers here. It is literally just following what resonates with you. Anyway, let's read this one. 'Tis better to be vile than vile esteemed, when not to be receives reproach of being, and the just pleasure lost, which is so deemed not by our feeling, but by others' seeing. For why should others, false, adulterate eyes, give salutation to my sportive blood? Or on my frailties, why are frailer spies, which in their wills count bad what I think good? No, I am that I am, and they that level at my abuses reckon up their own. I may be straight, though they themselves be bevel. By their rank thoughts, my deeds must not be shown, unless this general evil they maintain. All men are bad, and in their badness reign. Now, this is a difficult one, and I think this would have been difficult even back in Shakespeare's day. It requires rereadings. He's saying, it's better to be vile than to have people think you're vile but not be vile. Why? Because if you're actually vile, you get the pleasure of being vile, right? Or evil. And if you can see the letters, I mean, you've got the same letters that comprise evil as vile, and some of the levels, bevel, etc. There's a sort of forming, a sort of corruption until you get to the second last line, evil. It's much better to actually be bad and then get the pleasure of being bad than have other people think that you're bad. That's his opening assertion. He's wondering why must he be judged. So this is an instance where you wonder what has gone on. What has gone on to lead him to say this? It's very sermonistic. Each sonnet is kind of different in tone. This one feels like a sermon. It has biblical allusions. So some of the best art, the best literature is rife with allusion. Allusion means recalling other writers. If we go, we could tear this apart, but if we go down a little bit and around that volta, no, pause, yeah, caesura, I am that I am. It's a biblical allusion, and this is from Exodus 3:14, and God said unto Moses, I am that I am. Biblical Hebrew, I don't know, I can't speak Hebrew. God said to Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. So he's wrestling with this idea of identity. It but prefigures, foreshadows, Proust's exploration that our social personality is comprised of others' intellect, what other people think of us. You can meet somebody, and if they become your friend, when you think back on when you first met them many years later, they're a different person. Are they different because they've changed? People do change, but sometimes people don't change that much. You can change a lot. So he's wrestling with his idea of identity. He's wrestling with who you are, who I am. And some commentators, was one commentator called Stephen Booth, he said that this made Shakespeare sound smug What was the exact quote? It makes the speaker sound smug, presumptuous and stupid. I disagree. Helen Vendler, who has a great book on the sonnets, she maps them all out and breaks them down. I think it's called The Art of the Sonnets. Well worth picking up. She disagrees. Harold Bloom also disagrees. And I disagree as well. I don't think I Am That I Am, with its biblical recall, with its assertion, I think something bad has happened, and we don't know what that is. We don't have the full story. So the sonnet begs a lot of questions. You can even look at when he talks about people who are frailer spies, judging his frailties, which in their wills count bad what I think good. And it makes you wonder who's in the right here. Firstly, we have an incomplete story, so it will depend. But then you'll be questioning your own personhood, you question his, and then inherent life advice that asks you whether you agree. They that level up my abuses reckon up their own. Who's right here? And all throughout, you've got these eminent Shakespearean themes. Seeing is believing, seeing is truth, seeing is being. It's projection, it's like a crooked mirror. We've got preoccupations with justice, pleasure, lost pleasure, morality, how others perceive us. And this construct, this persona, is being perceived by us. And in a sense, we are being perceived by it. So there's that level to it. And throughout, you've got different metaphors. So here, Shakespeare is playing the carpenter. He uses the word bevel here. And that's just like architectural lexis, language. So we can get a sense that he might have been exposed to this sort of language in the playhouse when he was constructing scenery. And you wonder how much of this is a construct, how much of this is true feeling. There's so much left out, and so many questions that you can continue to ask yourself. But ultimately, it's a nice reminder that when you see a splinter in your neighbour's eye, you don't want to forget about the beam that might be in your own. So anyway, what should we do now? I would recommend that you find your own favourite sonnets. I can make a recommendation or a couple of recommendations for a few more that you might want to leap to immediately. Let's see, right off the bat, 94 is good, okay? And I would like to know what you think of that one. Ties into Nietzsche, if you know anything about Nietzsche. Whatever doesn't kill us makes us stronger, that sort of thing. Courage and morality and those sort of preoccupations. You might also want to turn to Sonnet 116. It's a very famous one. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds. He deploys some great imagery and some great metaphors from the sea to the sky to space. That's a good one. And the challenge there is, can you take this really, really famous one and all the cultural embeddedness and still get something out of it yourself, something new? Can you shed that momentarily? Another one I might recommend, 30. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past. There's a lot of self-deprecation here. There's a lot of irony in this one. If you've read anything by Viktor Frankl, you can think about love in different senses, and some great language like weep afresh love's long since cancelled woe. Figure out what Shakespeare's doing there with his extensive post-modification. Another one I might direct you to is 55, Sonnet 55. Not marble, nor the gilded monuments of princes shall outlive this powerful rhyme. Now this should induce some existential crisis in you. But ultimately, I'd like you to go through all of them. We have time. You have time. Take your time with it. Enjoy it. Read them aloud. And then rank your top 10 favourites. And let me know your ranking. Write about them. Talk about them. Live them endlessly. Reread them. Ponder them. And enjoy them. Relish them.